Done?
Perfect. So you're live, Belinda. I'm handing it over to you now.
Okay. Is it time to start?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. Thanks, everyone. I am completely intimidated going after Chris Barber. That was an amazing presentation. So hopefully I will have something that will resonate with what you need to do. I want to thank the sponsors and thank the Power Platform Finance Conference altogether. And thank you for inviting me. This is a topic that I absolutely love. My name is Belinda Allen. I currently live in Charleston, South Carolina in the US. I lived in New York City longer than anywhere else, so I like to think of that as home. I am an MVP, a Microsoft certified trainer, and basically I just love learning. So this is our agenda for today. We're going to talk about modeling the chart of accounts, transactions, budget states, relationships, talk about a few KPIs, and some suggested financial visuals, the ones that are all but one will be right out of the box, and then hopefully we'll have time for Q&A. But I say I hopefully will have time because I have 25 tips regarding these topics of things that you need to focus on when you're working on your financial statements. So let's go ahead. I'm going to pull up. We're going to start with the chart of accounts and some of the points, because 25 tips is a lot to go through in a 45-minute session and allow time for Q&A. So we're going to have just some talking points on some of these. And the first one that I want to point out is the chart of accounts themselves. If you can, and I totally agree with Chris, actually Matthew Roche from Microsoft has his maxim, we call it, try to do your data modeling as far upstream as possible and downstream as necessary. So if you can make sure that when you're bringing in your chart of accounts that you're including categories, subcategories, which statement it belongs on, and even if you go to your most detailed financial statement and try to include the description for that particular line, you're going to find that will make building your financial statements a breeze, because then you'll have something that you could put a filter on, and that's something that is incredibly important. And I'll show you a little tip on that, or what it would kind of look like and how it could help you. So let me pull up. Let's see, come in here. This is just a little a little down and dirty one, but you can see I have some categories here in this particular visual, and this is a great way to break it down. This is really cheap for sorting purposes here. But again, we're trying to come up with something very, very simple. I like to focus on the report consumer. And I honestly believe that financial statements should be shared throughout the company. So if you can make some of the visuals really simple and easy for end users to learn, it's going to be something that is super beneficial. I also believe that you probably should think about what is your non-financial account, your unit account. Let's say you're a manufacturer. Perhaps that would be the number of widgets that you produce. If you're a hotel, the number of hotel room nights that you sell. If you could find this unit of measure in your business, it may even be consulting hours or whatever it is, and then start looking at your statements in that particular way. So what is my income divided by the number of hotel rooms we rented? So I know how much money we made per hotel room we rented. That's going to really make it in bite-sized chunks that is understandable to the majority of your department managers. My experience goes back to the hotel business, and right out of college, I managed a hotel. Our executive housekeeper was amazing. She knew how to keep that hotel spotless. She knew how to create esprit de corps among her staff. And that was fantastic. She had all the skills she needed for her job. However, when we wanted to look at statements such as the financial statements, how much did you spend on laundry soap? It became a bit confusing that some months I would say you did really well on spending, and other months I would say, why did we spend extra? And because the numbers could look completely different. But when we broke it down into the number of rooms that we sold, I could say, why did we spend 70 cents on laundry per room we rented this month, and last month we only spent 40 cents. And then it becomes something that's very easily understandable. Oh, maybe there was a sale this month and we stocked up for the next several months, in which case I might want to accrue those expenses forward. Or maybe last month we were writing off of a big supply. So these are things that are going to help you and help the people consume the data in the report. So these are some of the tips that I have, tips 1 and 2 for modeling the chart of accounts. As I move through and I look at modeling transactions, there are a couple things that I want to point out here as well. I'm going to go back to my data here. And let's go and look in the data mode. I'm going to go to transactions here. And one of the things that I like to do, and of course, I pulled up the wrong report. So let's go to this one. All right. I like when I'm working, and often I will hide this. GL entries. There we go. I like to have a net debit and a net credit amount. And oh, of course, I'm not going to see it there. I need to come in and open up my amounts here. And that's budget. You could see Chris has me running scared. Okay, so, and I don't have it here, but what I like to do is do a net debit and a net credit. And the net debit, let's see. Oh, this is pretty close to being the same. This one's actually looking at a number. I like to look at my debit minus credits so that if I want to, for example, focus on my assets, I can just then call that particular number and I don't have to worry about reversing the sign. Or if I'm looking at sales, I'll look at my net credit, which would be credits minus debit. So again, I don't have to worry about changing the sign up on it. So I find that to be super helpful. Another thing we need to be very conscious of is beginning balances. You really need to understand, if you are one of the dev people building a report, and perhaps you may not be super accounting oriented, you really need to understand how the beginning balances work. Do your balances for cash, let's say, do you just have to add up every transaction previously, or do they roll forward into the new year? And if they roll forward into the new year, what does that date look like? And how can you identify that particular balance? Because if you only want to look at net, then you need to be sure to exclude that beginning balance. So that's something that's super important. Also, voids, you want to make sure that you exclude voids. If your system, if your financial system, your ERP system, allows for transactions to be voided, even if they're not posted or committed to the system, you need to account for that inside of your data set. And I stress this because even though the people in the accounting department might say, oh, we never void transactions, I have found through 30 some odd years of experience that the more someone says, we never, the more likely someone along the line has done that. So we need to go ahead and account for it if your system allows it. And then if you can access unposted transaction as well, then you might want to include those and then identify them. So when you're looking at financial statements, it's not included, but it's a great way to do a what if scenario. So it'll allow you to say, if this transaction posted, what if? What would it end up looking like? So that's something I like to do as well. I also want to talk about aggregating payroll. I do not like to see payroll in detail in the system here. I'd rather get a detailed payroll report. And so also, if you have a lot of years of history, if you have 20 years of history and you only need detail perhaps maybe 3 or 4 years back, and you want to include all the 20 years of history, then you simply want to aggregate it inside of Query Editor, or preferably at your source, and then you can append the two together. So that's something that I find that can be incredibly helpful. Okay, so on budgets as well. If you're doing budgets in budgeting, you might want to have, and I know there's a lot of tools that have it, you might want to include a Power App for write back, or if it doesn't have write back capabilities, into it so that you could also make changes to your budget, especially if you use a pro forma budget, meaning I have budgeted my salary expense to be 20% of my revenue. And if my revenue is twice as high, then therefore my salary should, in theory, be 20% of my total revenue. So to do that, you might want to have a pro forma one where you can go through and write back and do a comparison to that as well. Now we're going to get into some specific modeling tasks. And I want to talk about dates in a date range title. So we're going to go back to a report, and I'm going to actually build this out. We'll do a real demo here. So, all right. I'm going to come in and look at, and we'll just look at this cash forecast that we have here. Right now, I'm just looking at the year 2028. You can see I am using the forecasting capability that is part of the analytics that we have listed right here. And if I want to have the date range, I'm not a big fan of having too many visuals on the page. Again, I like to focus on that report consumer and making it easier for them. And one of the things I like to do is make the title more explanatory. And so cash forecast helps, but I probably also want to include what time period it's for. So one of the things that I like to do, and I'm going to open up my calendar and put a measure in here. I'm going to create a new measure for my date range. And there we go. And let me see if I can get my Zoom it going. And I'm going to create this measure called date range. And boy, that was really ugly. All right. And in my date range, I'm going to set two variables. The first variable I'm going to set is the start date. And the start date will be the, let's see, I want to get the min date. And I'm just going to select date from my date table. I like to call it a calendar table so it doesn't confuse people when they see date.date. So that is my min date, but I want to format this as a text field so I don't really overwork my processing, my processor when I'm creating this particular measure. Because even though DAX can override data types, you don't want to do that because it could really wreak havoc with the speed of your report. So what I'm going to do instead is use the format command. That's my value. Oops, put it in parentheses here. And how I want it to be is I'm going to format this in UK, even though this is US. So I'm going to do date, month, or maybe I should say everywhere but the US, and then put in the year and then end the parentheses. So this is my start date, and I'm going to cheat and copy this and paste. And I'm going to call this one my end date. That wasn't smart. And now, this time, instead of getting the minimum date, I'm going to get the maximum date. And now I have my variable set. And so my date range is simply going to be, because this is all text now, the start concatenated with a space, dash space, whoops, and then concatenate that with the end date. Now I have this great date reference here. So what I could do now, if I were to come in, let me get out of this, click somewhere else. Okay, so now if I come up to my title, I have a smart narrative that pops up. So what I'm going to do is just click on the value, put in the date range, and then now once I tab all the way down, and if I have more than one value, I'd probably want to put it right there. And come on, where's my date range? There we go. Now I see the date range, and I'm going to save it. It does not pick up the font very well, so hopefully we'll get that worked out a little better. And then now, let me stretch this out. Now you can see it's underlined. So this is a dynamic date range. And now whatever date I choose, this is 2028. If I come up and choose 2027, my date range is going to change. If I focus on a particular point, the date range will change for that particular point. And now what I can do is not have to worry about having the slicer on the report. I can put the year slicer on the filter pane so that my report is a lot cleaner. It's easier for report consumers to use. So this is something that I find incredibly powerful to use. And of course, it's a measure, so I'm not adding any data to my report, and it works really well. I also would like to encourage you, if you have a lot of years, like that example of 20 years, you might want to put your dates in M instead of in DAX. That's just a recommendation. It's really easy. You could even start with a year and then build your year out with a list. So let's just take a little bit of a gander there. I love DAX. I think it's powerful and amazing, but it's far too easy to create a year. And I'm not going to do anything super fancy here. I'm just going to go to enter data, and I will rename this to start. I'll name the table to date, because I have a calendar table. And now what I'm going to do is, in the field here, I'm simply going to enter in my start date. So the first day of my fiscal year, and let's say that's 2020. So now I have that date set, and I can go ahead and click on OK. And now what this is going to do, just like you'd expect, you see your date table here. Now what I can do is start creating additional fields here. So if I were to come in and highlight this particular column, go to add column, go to date, and then go to, in this case, a calendar year, I'm going to put in end of year. So now I have my calendar year. So now what I can do, actually, what I probably should do instead of end of the year, is come in and insert a new column for today. So I'm just going to add a custom column, and then I'll call this one today, and then today, now, there you go. And I'll do my local time right now and click OK. And now I have the wrong field, the wrong formula. Wouldn't you know? Oh, someone out there was screaming, put the parens. Okay, so I'm going to change this to a date. So now I have today. And what I could do is come in now and put in the end of the year. And I might even want to make this plus one additional year. Now I have a start date and an end date, and I can start creating out and use more M to create different lists for me. And so this is kind of a cool thing to do. One of the things you could do is come in and calculate the number of days between these two things, and then go for and create the whole list out. That's an easy way to do it. But one of the things, let's see, well, we'll just do that. We'll come in, we'll add a column, and we could have just skipped the whole today. And let's see, I'm going to put in days, and then I'll put in date diff and I wasn't planning on showing this. So when you do that, this is when you get into trouble. So, okay, I'm not going to get into that. Would have to dig that up. But you could go through and create calculations between them and open them right up, and then create the formula from there. So this is something neat that you could do, and then start building out your whole date table from that particular spot. I'm going to go ahead and close and get myself out of trouble. A couple things that I also like to do in my date field. So let's go back to one of these reports and take a look. And in this one, I like to put the month number along with the month name. This enables me to come in and do a sort by. So I can come in and sort by the month number, and this is the weekday, or the weekday number. So it will sort chronologically instead of alphabetically. So that's something I find useful. I like to put the Q in front of the quarter. And then one of the things, even if you're on a, pardon me for my dog barking.
Belinda,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, can you please zoom out? No, zoom in.
Yes.
Your screen. because the audience here is actually zoom out to make it
There.
big.
Is that better?
No, it's much smaller now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Make it bigger. Yeah,
you're
there we go.
making yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay. Thank you
thank
for
you.
that. Yes. Um, so I like to put the period, and the period actually, even if I'm on a fiscal year, that maybe starts in July. I like to put the actual calendar year and the calendar month. This way, if I have a financial report that's going to extend beyond the fiscal year, which I think is important. I think for operational purposes, you should always be looking at a rolling year or a rolling quarter. Then again, it will sort in the correct order, and it's going to be something logical that the report consumer is going to understand. And the same with the fiscal quarter. And you will see how I do this when I get through. Now, as I move on to the next area of I want to talk about some relationship tips. And one of the things, if you look here at my fact table for transactions, and this is just a little small demo company that I like to work with. I hide my, if I collapse up here, it'll be a little more understandable. I hide everything that gets related to the relationship to from another table in the fact table. The last thing you want is for somebody, especially if you have a budget, for somebody to filter on the date from the fact table, because the fact table or the many side will not propagate that filter to the one side or the dimension table. And then in that case, if you're looking at a budget as well, if you have two fact tables, then the budget fact table is not going to be propagated to the filter that you set up in the transaction. And you could spend a lot of time doing that. It also helps the end user in a lot of way because they won't be asking the question, especially if you have a budget, you'll have account numbers in an account table, you have account numbers in transactions, and then you're also going to have account numbers in a budget. And they won't be asking, which account number do I use if I want to build my own particular visual? So this is something that is quite the big deal. Now let's come into the account table for a moment. I also want to talk about setting descriptions. This is incredibly important. Let me collapse up the calendar date and go over here to the account. So I have like my account category here. So if I put in a description, this describes I'm a horrible speller, or typist rather. This describes the category of the account. So, which is a really horrible explanation for an account category. I'm going to leave it misspelled. Let's pretend. Okay, so now that I have that, if the user were to hover over that particular account number in the report mode, so I'm going to come back to report mode and try not to go too fast when I'm zooming back and forth. I don't want to make you drunk. So if I were to come in, and I should have had my description display. It is not displaying. Why is it not displaying? Oh, because I did account, not account category. Okay, hello. So now when I hover over it, I get this as description as to what the account's going to be. This is something that's going to help out the users in an incredible way. And this really has a great purpose if you're looking at a ratio or some form of calculation, month over month change and so forth. This is going to help out your users. You could also assign the descriptions to the account name. So these are all going to be things, or the table names. This is all going to be something that is going to be incredibly helpful. Another thing that I would recommend doing while you're here, a little bit out of order, but you could see the synonyms here. And these are going to be things that help you a great deal. So if you were to come in, let me open up my bank accounts. And I'm going to choose my checkbook ID. So I got the checkbook ID. I'm going to also enter this in as bank account, uh, bank, checkbook. You could enter in all sorts of synonyms here that can be used automatically inside of some of the AI that's built in, some of the Q&A that's built in. So you could enter in all the syllables you need here. Of course, you could also do it inside the Q&A window as well in the tooling tip. So I would recommend that you set these fields up as well. And then I also recommend, let's collapse up the bank here and go back to transactions. And right, this one I do not have set up. I recommend that you utilize the folder option. So I like to, for financials, I'll have one for a month, I'll have one for a year, and then I'll have one for quarter perhaps. So here's a month over month change, and here's a last month actual. I'm going to highlight both of these. You can see my net credit there. I use net for the net balance. And when I have a field selected in this property panes, there's a display folder. So I'm going to just call this one monthly amounts. And then now I have this folder for monthly amounts. It'll make it a lot easier to organize your transactions. So again, I also have year to date, and maybe you don't want to call it year to date amounts, but I'll just call this year amounts. And now I have another folder. So this is going to organize and make it a lot easier for users to be able to figure out what it is they want to look at. And then you could collapse them up and then make the number of fields that are appear that you have significantly smaller. So you can move your measures in here along with actual fields. So that's a big deal. And as Chris mentioned, if you were to do analyze in Excel, it's going to bring over all the numbers from your original data source as a text field. So I go through everything like credit amount. I will enter in a measure for credit, which is doing nothing but summing the credit amount from here. And then I hide the original one. So everyone's just using the credit amount. If you do that, then in that particular mode, I would recommend keeping the name of the original source something that's logical and makes sense, but not what you want your ultimate name to be. So for example, I have credit. I want to use credit as my measure. So I called this one credit amount. So I could have those two unique fields. All right, so let me zoom out for a moment so I could catch up back to where we are. And then I want to talk about some special KPIs. So let's come in to our report here. Actually, we'll stop here for a moment because these are three different KPIs. Actually, it's four that I recommend for everybody. One, the AR and the AP turnover. This is quite the big deal, especially the AR one. I find that one to be really important because that one's going to be determining how effectively you are extending credit to your customers. So I always recommend for a sales approach, or perhaps this would be part of the finance department, that you analyze what your customers have. And then salespeople should be taking advantage of available credit too. But how many times a year are you collecting your AR on average? And this is going to be net sales. So you're taking your sales and you're subtracting refunds and returns and credits that you may have issued and divided by the average AR. So if you're looking at this for the duration of a year, you're going to take your beginning AR and your ending AR and add those together and divide by 2. Now, you might want to try to determine a more realistic way. I would even skip maybe that particular formula and let Power BI average it for you. So if you have a table where you could look at the average rate, the average AR per day, then that might be something that you want to just average out. AP the same way. That one's actually analyzing how frequently you're paying at the rate in which you're paying your vendors. And you might want to focus on this for if you're a distribution company, for example, you might want to focus on just your suppliers, and you could see the rate in which you're paying them. So that's something that could be pretty helpful. Inventory turnover is a really big deal because if you keep inventory in your company, it is, it's a big cost. And so if you have old inventory, this is a bad thing. You need to turn your inventory over twice a year. And this is going to be the cost of goods sold divided by your average inventory. And so you're really looking at how much you sold And those are the inventory items that we're really counting. And you might even want to evaluate this for classes or groups of inventory or individual inventory items, again, divided by the total inventory amount that you have. And in this particular case, I would use flat out dollar amounts. That's something I would do, or I would do base unit account, so you can measure that. And 4 to 6 is a really good number for turning it over during the course of a year for the inventory turnover. So that's quite the big deal. So what I mean by base inventory, though, is let's say you sell cans of soda. And so your base inventory, you count the number of cans that you have, but you could purchase the cans in cases, or maybe even a whole gross, and you might sell it as a 6-pack or a 12-pack. And so, but what we want to do is measure it in the very base unit of measure. So you want to be very careful when you're looking at those numbers that you're actually comparing apples to apples. That's why it's easier for people to use the dollar amount of the cost as opposed to the actual number of items. So if you are using the number of items, be very careful that you're always relating back to the base unit of measure. And then we have the current ratio. And this is really important because this is going to measure your ability to pay off all your short-term debt. And to do that, you would have to look at your short-term assets. And I have an example of this one. So if I come back in here, I've got a little ratio here, and I'm going to zoom in on it. And one of the things that I did here to make it easier for the users, I do have the name in this particular card, the name current ratio here. But I could also see the formula that is created by it right in the title. And I find this to be really useful because it's going to help users understand exactly what this number is coming from. So this is something else that I like to do and I think is powerful. By all means, don't underestimate the value of a card. I like to have a whole page with nothing but card values on it so they could be used on dashboards. And I'm talking the official dashboard inside the Power BI service. I find that to be, I'm not a giant fan of dashboard usage. I am a giant, except because I am a giant fan in alerts, using alerts on the dashboard, and this is a great way to do it. So if your ratio gets really low, then that's something that you need to be concerned about, because if you have a problem with sales, you're not going to be able to pay off all your long-term debt. So that's quite a big problem. All right, so let's move on. And now we're going to talk about a lot of the fun stuff. So let's get back to the reports and look at some of our suggestions here. And this is going to get us through the end of this particular session. And let me find a couple things that I want to show here. All right. So one of them is, and that's not the right one. Let me get the other one. Okay, so for details, and again, I focus a lot on individuals who are not really financial people. And in this case, I have, oops, sorry, I'm trying not to move my mouse too much. I have a debit column, a credit column. Financial people, us, we like to see that. Net would be just the difference between the two, debit minus credit. Obviously, this might be easier for some people to see. I noticed one thing Chris had that I really liked is he explained when right on the report, which one was positive and negative. So if it was, if it was a sales, it would show up this way or versus the other way. So this is another way. If you don't want to put that explanation on, just show the debit and the credit. So I do not like to put this kind of detail because this is going back to the individual transactions. I don't like to include this on the report by itself. I typically hide this page. You could see it's hidden and it's included as part of the drill down. And then from that point, if I want to get to anything, I could just use my right click and drill through. So this is something that I find to be really valuable, putting the detail on a separate page, and don't lead with that, even if they say that's what they want. Here's another use of cards that I like to utilize cards. And normally I will make the colors be the same as what you're seeing. I did not do that here. So that was bad Belinda. So let me come in and pull up. Here's an example of where they do match. So I'm in the service here. So I have my sales. This is a profit and loss statement. My sales matches my cost of goods sold, which is kind of red or pink. My expenses, these colors are probably too close together. And then I have my net profit. Now, the reason I like a line chart like this for financial statements, most people just look at the bottom line anyhow. So why give them, I'm talking department managers, why give them all of that information? So from here, though, they can come in and they should be able to drill down. And I'm not seeing that option pop up. There we go. Got drill through. And the drill through would take us to the detail summary page, which is very similar to what you saw. And then I have another detail summary that they could look at. But I also do this in a balance sheet mode as well. And so this is something that makes it easier. And if you can make the colors coordinate so that they line up consistently, like everywhere I see purple, I'm looking at net profit, then that way it makes it easier for the end users as they go along. Let me come back to my other report. And one of the things that I like to do, and I'm not going to zoom in on this right away, but this scatter chart is something that's incredibly valuable. And I'm using my quarters here, my fiscal quarters. And in this case, I'm monitoring only cash accounts because I want to see how my cash is moving. And I've put the quarters in I will zoom in here so you can see what I have, where I put my fiscal quarters in the play axis, the net amount, in the size axis. I have my actual GL account because I have different bank accounts. And then I have actual year to date and then month over month change. So what we're looking at in here is month over month change. I guess I could zoom in. And when I click on play, we see it moving. But what a lot of people don't realize is I'm going to come up and select just this cash account. I could just click the fields. Let me try it again. There we go. And now I'm literally watching the text or watching the cash move for that particular account. And I could switch to another account if I want to and start monitoring that. And I can see a lot of what's going on with my cash. And in this particular case, I'm only looking at net change. Oh, no, I am looking at year-to-date actual, sorry. Oh, no, I'm looking at month over month change. So, and I remove my balance sheet or my beginning balances so I can just see how my cash is moving when it's going up and down. So this is a great way to look at data over a period of time. A lot of people don't realize, though, that you can click on it and see how your cash changed in that particular time period. So that is something that I absolutely love. Decomp tree, my favorite one. Use it for things in your balance sheet. Cash is a really good example of this because if you include subledger information like the customers and the vendors, you'll be able to see that information as you go along. And then you can also see here I have payroll, and that should be, again, aggregated so that you don't see individual checks even or who the checks are to. I just will aggregate it usually by pay period or maybe even by the month. So however you want to aggregate it to be able to mask the individual pay information. That's going to be something that is particularly helpful. I'm going to move over here. This is one of my favorite visuals. I will zoom in for cash, particularly. If you go in and add, this is a free visual, free custom visual. You go in and you look for a calendar, you will see an app source, you will see this app. And what I've done is I've turned diverging on in the formatting. And on days where more cash is coming in, they're darker green, more cash going out, they're red, and then everything else is in yellow. And I'm just looking at the change in my cash, or you could use your actual cash balance for these individual days. But this is something that I find particularly helpful to see on what days I'm having more influx in cash compared to outgoing cash. So this is a favorite visual of mine. I do like cash forecasting. We already looked at the trend report. I love it with anomalies as well. Here's one with the anomalies. By all means, include this because if you're not familiar with it, you can click on it and you will get some ideas of potentially what's causing those anomalies. Some nice built-in AI for us, which is pretty cool. And then I want to show you, I have two other reports that I like to look at with cash in lieu of a cash flow statement. And this is one that I built for my own company probably about 25 years ago in, I think it was first built in Lotus 123, and of course now it's in Power BI. But what it's doing is it's looking at all of my bank accounts, and it's looking at all the debits. This is all the debit entries. So I'm looking at the detail and all the credits. So I can see what's increasing the balance, even if it's a correction, it's in here. And you can see payroll's just listed by itself here. And then I have all of everything that decreases. And there's a blank one there, but I don't have the drill through on this particular page, but you could add drill through to see what's causing the blanks to occur. And then I'm aggregating it by the sub ledger. And so now I could see basically money coming in or corrections, money going out. And then this is something I like to do a little bit different from the rest of the statements. I do not like to use the transaction date, the date it appears on the financial statement. I look at it by the date it was put in or committed or posted to the accounting system. So if I look at the cash every Monday to see what happened last week, then I know when I'm looking at the last 7 days, I'm seeing what changed our cash balance in the last 7 days, not based off of when it appears on the statement, but why did the number change since the last time I looked at it? And this is a really important thing when you think about it, because it's easy for somebody to go back and populate something from I don't know, 6 months past, and it would be hidden on the report. And then finally, one of the things that I like to do here, this is my take on cash flow. So I look at the changes in cash. So I'll look at like the last 3 full months of whatever current month we're in, and I compare that to changes to AR, changes to sales, changes to AP. And then depending on what kind of your business you're in, if you're in inventory, I'll include changes to inventory and cost of goods sold, which is because I could buy something in a month and then sell it in that same month. So, or I could buy it and it could still be sitting in my inventory. So what have I spent on inventory items and my changes to my net profit? And by comparing these by month, I could figure out pretty easily where I need to focus. So if I look at February, my cash increased 2.4 million. My AR increased 106 and my sales 152. So this increase to my cash did not come from my sales. Well, I could see my AP went up a little bit, 108, and my inventory 107. So those were pretty much a wash. So this tells me that the increase in cash had to be something outside of sales. Perhaps this was a contribution from the owner or so forth. So this is something that I find to be particularly important. And then the last two things that I want to show you, I'm going to go back to this report. I've already shown you this. I like to call this an operational statement because, again, this is, as I mentioned, this is something easily understandable by most users. And you could do this with balance sheets. You could do it with profit and loss statements. And you could even do it by that unit. So if you take that unit measure we talked about, so like the hotel business, the number of rooms that we sold, or if we're a manufacturer, the number of widgets that we produced, or the number of, if we're a warehousing or distribution center, the number of widgets we sold. I had a company that I worked with that made doormats. And even though the doormats were different sizes, their base unit of measure, they like to compare everything to the square foot produced. And so we would look at the financial statements by square foot. And then that gave us a really even kill when we were comparing month over month. How did we improve our statements? And then the very last thing I want to show you is how we can use PowerPoint as our book. So I'm going to come back in. Here's PowerPoint, the actual demo we're on now. And this may be something that you've seen or not seen, but This is like seriously one of my favorite new features, especially in the world of financials, because now you could use PowerPoint, which everybody uses, and everybody has a good rudimentary understanding of PowerPoint. So they're going to be comfortable in it in the first place. And we are going to use it to build our report out. So let me see if I can find my mouse. There it is. So I'm going to come up to insert. And if you haven't already done so, there is this my add-in space. And if you go to get add-ins, and there we go, and you do a search for Power BI, there are two. Make sure you get the one that is Microsoft Power BI and simply click on add. Then once it's included, all you have to do again is go to insert and then my add-ins. You'll see, and I already did a boo-boo here. So let me unzoom for a second. You need to be, actually, I'm kind of glad I did the boo-boo. So I'm going to log in into where my dev environment, because it's going to use my login for PowerPoint to connect to my login for Power BI. So I'm going to come up to do an insert. I'm going to do my add-ins. I'm going to select that Microsoft one. And then now I get this page or this visual right here, and it's telling me to paste in my URL. So what I'm going to do is go back to my report here. And if this is the page I want, I'm going to copy that URL. There's a couple ways you could get the URL, but I find this one to be the easiest. And I'm going to paste that in and click on insert. And now I have a connection to Power BI service so that it's still completely interactive. If I wanted to get the year 2028 instead, it's still completely interactive. I have my filter pane, which I could collapse if I wanted to. So this is an incredibly powerful way, not only because of this, but this is part of it's part of my other slideshow. So I could put in other things as well in here. And one of the things I really love about this, I am a huge fan of Power BI apps, but the nice thing about this particular method is I can put in pages from other reports as well. And by doing that, I can really go in and do something that's uniquely tailored as a financial statement package. And then one of the things you could do, so let me go back to 2027, and let's say I didn't want this to be completely interactive. I want it to be static. There is this little, let me zoom in so you can see it. It's not always easy to get, but there's this little arrow here. And then from here, I could go in and I could reload if I need to reload it. I could show it as a saved image instead. And now this is a static image that is not interchangeable. So now here's where it gets a little tricky. So I'm going to come back in. There it is. Okay. And I'm going to come back. And because I have access to that report, then I can see this. So you do need to have a license for Power BI to get it, but what a powerful way for your users to interact with the report without all the noise of the Power BI service scattered around it. And then the ability to get additional information as well is just an amazing thing. Before I start taking any kind of Q&As, I do want to thank the sponsors again, and especially Rishi Sabra. So thank you. And this is my contact information. And are there any questions?
That was fantastic. Some really, really great tips there.
Oh, well, thanks, because I was terrified, Rishi, after going after Chris, because he is just like, whoa. But yeah, so yeah, we did 25 tips in just a short amount of time.
Great. We've got a question on how you do the historical data roll up. So
I
do you
thought we would
query or?
Yeah, I thought we would get something on that one. So I'm going to come back in here. I often call this not your daddy's financials.
Yeah.
Just because I think it's hysterical. So let me go into transform data, and I'll show you one way that you could do it. Again, the preference would be that you do it at the original data source and not in Power Query. But if you're going to do it in Power Query, it could be done pretty easily. So I've done all my modeling here. Let's say I'm going to come in and roll up. I'm going to roll up history, but just to make it easier here, I'm going to roll up payroll, because it's going to be basically the same information. If I come, or same method used, you would just do it with perhaps years or date ranges. So I'm going to say exclude payroll. And now I have this filter. If I zoom in, you'll see I'm excluding my payroll. So now I could come in and duplicate this. And on this one, I'll just change it up here in my address, because it makes me feel like I'm a programmer. And this time I'm going to go ahead and include just the payroll. So now I have one that is transactions, and I'll call this payroll only. Oh, and by the way, please do not name your tables something like fact whatever and dim whatever. End users will not understand that. What I do for me is, you can see I just use groups to put them in here. So I have my payroll only transactions and I have regular transactions. And now that I have this, I could simply come up to transform and simply do a group by. And I don't know how many columns I have here. How many? Oh, 9, not too many. Okay. So what I'll do is set this to advanced and then start working my way down. I don't care about the journal entry number, so I'm going to skip that, but it does mean I would need to add a journal entry page to it. So I'll aggregate by the series here. I'll aggregate by the date, and then account number. And then what's next? If I come in and add, then I also have, let's see. Oh, actually, what I might want to do, we have journal entry number. So I could fix that one. Then we got debit amount. So I can call this one journal entry. And I could just tell it to count rows or something odd like that. Or I could just go back and add a column later. I'm just going to do count rows. And then I have debit amount. So I'm going to come in here and we'll call this debit amount. And whoops. And I'm going to sum this. And then I have credit amount. And I'll sum this. And I'm going to stop in just a moment. We'll pretend the others are, we got transaction date. I'm not going to put the other fields on here. I'll leave those off. So let me just get rid of this. Okay. So actually, I'm going to get rid of the journal entry too. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And now I have an aggregated based off of the date, where I'm not getting a lot of that detail. So if I were to look back up here, I have journal entry, I have series. Journal entry description might be something I want to focus on. So I'm going to come down here and just add in a new column, a custom column. And I'll call this journal entry description. And then I'll just call this payroll. And so you would finish polishing out your, you would want to have basically all the columns that you would have, but you could create your own column names and your own journal entry numbers and so forth. And then now I'm going to go ahead and just turn off the enable load. So that's hidden. And then in my regular transaction table, so if you didn't see that, I just turned off enable load. So it'll be used in the report refresh, but not on the report itself. And then now I'm going to come up to the transaction table and I'll simply do an append, and I will append in my payroll only to that. And then now I'm looking at all the detail for everything except for payroll. And in the case of the previous year, it might be transactions for or history transactions. And maybe that's your 2000 to 2018, and then and you make the change that way. But what I like to do when I'm doing it is I'll go through the process of organizing everything. I kind of usually do it earlier in the data modeling. I don't do it at the very end. But now I have this particular transaction. If I were to come in and load more, you're going to see I have payroll in here as well. There we go. So now I have payroll. And if I were to just filter to payroll only, then what you're going to end up seeing is just those aggregated transactions. That is how I typically aggregate them. I hope that explains it.
Yeah, that's very useful. Thanks. Yeah, very, very good way to go from general ledger, your detailed by account, into kind of trial balance, group it by account by month. And that's what you need for financial statements generally. And you can have both levels of fact table in your model. And
You
then
can.
you can use your trial balance to actually just show your financial statements, and then just have a drill through page to go and drill into the details. You can see your revenue. And you look, okay, this looks interesting. Right click, drill through, and then you can see the individual transactions or journals, even, you know, for that particular set.
Exactly.
So really, really useful pattern to use group by here as well. Right, do we have any questions in the room? I don't think we had anything else online. Yep.
There is a column description and a synonym. Can we display that column description inside Power BI data table instead of a column name?
No, that would be nice. No, I don't know. There might be a way. Rishi, are you familiar with how somebody could go through and display like the column description? I don't think you can. I don't think
Well, you could do it if you have it in Excel or something. You can just do it programmatically, right? In Tabular Editor, essentially. So you can just in Tabular Editor, you can just probably download a script and just copy and paste.
True.
Chris will know how to do this. But there's definitely a way to do it.
And the reason why I really like doing the synonyms is because I am a giant fan of the Q&A visual. And what I like to do, this is a report I love giving everybody, because then you basically giving them the opportunity, although that was not too organized. Let me change the background here so it stands out a little bit better. This is like one of my favorite things to do for people. Okay, so pretend that it's laid out pretty. Okay, so what's cool about this, especially when we're looking at, you could set up all these questions for them. And let me see if I could actually end up with some, let me get rid of that one. And the synonyms will help here if you're trying to analyze things. So here we put in like checkbook and bank. I could come in and say, let's see, balance by bank for 2027. Now, what's cool about this is it looks at not only the tables themselves, of course it's not yielding me anything here, so I don't know which one I'm in. So let's try that. And by original posting date, there we go. Okay, so in this particular case, it's able to look at table names, the individual field names, and the data in the fields. And so now what's cool about this is I have this interactive report that I feel like I've built myself. This is why I like to give it to users. And so just a little, what do you call it? Not a nugget, but a little hidden, surprise for them, where they could create their own interactive report. And so this is one of my favorite things to do. And this is another reason to put the synonyms in, because they may not call customers. Maybe they call them guest. Maybe they call them clients. And so whatever the case may be, they can go through and enter in the name that they want it to be. So let me put in net change. Or net, maybe that's fine. Any other questions?
Yep. No, that's great. Does that answer your question? Yeah, I mean, the Q&A is really good because obviously you build a report with a specific set of questions or, you know, things that you want to, that you've been given requirements for to build. But the person viewing the report might have their own questions or their own things about it. So
Right.
they're not going to know how to write DAX to answer those. So, well, they're not going to have the ability to if they're just viewers.
Right.
But even just viewers can do this. They can ask questions in natural language and have
Right. And
Power BI produce the visual for them.
exactly. And I recommend you create your own questions once you enter your first one in. And to do that, you would just come into this Q&A tool right here. And then you can choose suggest questions. And once you enter your first one in, all the default ones that AI created will be gone. So you'll want to make sure you enter in enough of them. But this is a great way to get users a little more adopted to the changes that are being made, because all they have to do is pick the question that they want to see. And when they like, that one might be a little more interesting. There you go. Pick the question that they want to see, and they see, just like we saw in the date range and the title, if it's blue and it's underlined, it's dynamic, so that you can make some additional changes to it. So now I have like by department ID here. If I wanted to change that to by series, then I'm going to end up with something different entirely altogether. And so by subledger, so I could then start typing or highlight one of those sections and then look for what I'm looking for and see if I can get a change. That example there, so we'll call it department again. But yeah, I find that to be incredibly helpful.
Right. Cool. Thanks, Belinda.